right. Good morning, guys. Before we grab our three themes like we always start with, I wanted to grab something else real quick. When we get with Israel to Mount Sinai, we're going to be in the book of Exodus still, you're going to notice that they miss something that a lot of people miss about church also. They come to the mountain and they want God to do things for them. And they come as an obligation to God in order for Him to fulfill those things. In order for God to answer my prayer to help so-and-so in the hospital, I got to go to church because that's what I owe Him. And they don't come to God in the mountain because they love Him. They don't come to God to learn more about Him or more about themselves through Him. They don't come to learn more about rules that they should have to obey, things that would restrain them to pull them away from this God. Literally, like Eddie pointed out for us last Sunday, what have you done for me lately? What can you do for me, God? And that's what builds the attitude and character of the people in the book of Exodus that echoes down to us too if we're not careful. Is that we look at God as, I need you to do these things for me. So I'm going to fulfill my obligation in prayer. I'm going to fulfill my obligation in Bible study. I'm going to fulfill my obligation in church attendance. Rather than coming and wanting to learn about God, wanting to know about God, and how to put God in your life, and how to learn to love Him more, and find reasons or rules that would restrain you from doing things that would draw you away from this God who loves you and who you love. So remember, when we come together as a church, there's a lot more to what we're doing here than just listening to me teach or anything, but we're coming to study God, to know Him, just like a father, to crave Him, to know that our dependency isn't on so He can help us have a good life and make all the decisions for us and give us everything we want, but so that we're in preparation for what comes next in our life, and that's eternity, and that's discipleship. We need to go out and do the opposite of what these people are going to get in trouble for doing by God, and go out and tell people about this God. Bring them to the knowledge of this God. But just remember, guys, when we come together, I know a lot of you guys are young, but that's what the church is for. That's what we do when we come together. We're coming to love God, to worship God, and to know Him better. By knowing Him better, we become better ourselves. You're going to notice when we get to the Ten Commandments, Jesus sums it up so easy for all of us. How do you take all of the rules that God has, every stipulation, every regulation, everything that He has, how do you break that down into something so simple? So they asked Jesus, they said, how can you sum up the old law? What is the sum of the old law? What is the greatest commandment, they asked Him. And He said, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. If we can do those two simple things, if we can love God and then love our neighbor as ourselves, the world would start to fix itself. It wouldn't matter what political party you gravitated toward, the world would start to fix itself. It wouldn't matter what you thought about the people or what their background was, the world would start to fix itself. Because we love ourselves a lot. And if you don't believe me, check survival. When survival kicks in, people go for themselves a lot. It takes a lot of strength, as we've been talking about with Christ, it takes a lot of strength to push that into selflessness instead of selfishness. So I just wanted to grab that theme with us also. So while we're learning, how do we learn about this God? How do we magnify Him? How do we come to know Him? We've got to understand His three things, His three purposes, the reason that He wrote this. The whole reason the plan was put together. And I encourage you and challenge you actually to watch a movie, to listen to a song and apply the same thing with God or without God. Because you'll hear it in the lyrics. You'll hear what the people say, the questions they ask, and the comments they make. In movies, you'll see it in the decisions that characters make with or without God. And it really puts in perspective the whole world. When you pick up a newspaper, with or without God. Pick up a magazine and you're reading, you're watching the news. Am I seeing with or without God? And you'll understand God's whole purpose that He's trying to teach us here and there. With me, your survival's up here. Without me, there is no survival. With me, there's rules, there's ethics, there's regulations, there's ceremonial things to get you to Christ, to get me to you, so I can save you, so that you can be saved. And then you come to the New Testament, the New Covenant. Is with God always easy? Is with God always you get all the good stuff? No, it comes with persecution. The world's going to hate you. Do evil people like good? No. So if we're good and we're godly, should evil people love us? So what does it say if people do, if evil people do love us, they're content with us? What does it say about us?
What's that?
What do we do?
We're not doing our job.
Yeah, we're not doing our job. Exactly what we're not doing. We're not doing our job. Our discipleship should be costing this price. Jesus said the world is going to hate you. With God, without God. Our second theme. How is God going to accomplish this with God, without God? How is He going to bring us to be back with God rather than without God? Well, we owe God a death. We owe God an eternal hellfire death. So how can God bring us back to Him if we owe God that death? Eternal separation.
Through Jesus.
Jesus. Yeah, Jesus is going to be the one that takes that price for you. So you see the need for the Messiah. You have no eternal hope without Christ. You better hope, when we're going through this Old Testament, that they're good enough to get us to Christ, because if not, we all go to hell. Need for the Messiah, and then we're also tracing the what? What are we looking for? What are we following historically and biblically?
Bloodline.
The bloodline. We're following the bloodline. You're going to understand the Bible better than most people in the world do when you follow the bloodline, because they can't account for why God steps in and saves the Jews specifically over the other 11 tribes. They say, well, God must love the Jews more, and we still deal with this stuff now, especially with everything going on in Palestine with Hamas and them. God loves the Jews more than He loves anybody else. But you and I know, when we study this, we say, well, there's a reason God jumped in the way of the bullet to protect Judah. And it's because He loved the Jews more, He loved the tribe of Judah more. Is that why He did it? What's inside of them? The bloodline. Now, after the bloodline is completed in Christ, does God still do that? Does He still protect the Jews specifically and especially? Does He have protection around them?
After Jesus? No.
After Jesus? No, not at all. 70 AD, there was no protection. And again, what's happening in Palestine? Is God intervening over there?
No.
No, who are they crying out for, by the way? Are they crying out for God to save them?
No.
Who are they crying out to? Anyone know?
Allah.
Not Allah.
I don't know.
But, well, the Muslims over there are crying out to America. America save us. Not God. God come and save us. America come and save us. Same mindset. And what's our third theme? Our third theme that opens up everything in Scripture. Satan in opposition to that plan. Satan in opposition to with God, without God. Satan in opposition to your need for the Messiah. If he can make you an evil, unrepentant sinner, if he can draw you so far away from God that you don't even know anything about Christ, nor will you, then he can pull you away from without God. He can pull you away from the need. He can pull you away from the bloodline. And what is he opposing? The bloodline. Is Satan watching this? A lot of people have a hard time realizing that Satan is following the bloodline. Who was told in Genesis about the bloodline?
The snake.
The snake, the serpent, Satan. God told him to his face. People say, well, Satan didn't know the plan. It wasn't like Satan was zoned out. When God grabs a hold of you, you listen. And he said, I'm going to send somebody that's going to bruise your head. You're going to bite his heels, going to bruise your head, seed of the woman. And I said, Satan, writing that down. And then later, when God's going to tell us, bloodline's coming out of Judah, guess what Satan's doing? He's writing it down. And when he says, I'm going to call my son from Nazareth in Bethlehem, but I'm going to call him out of Egypt, Satan's writing it down. And where is Satan when Jesus is born? Is he in the right place at the right time?
Probably.
Yeah. Is he there when Jesus is walking the earth?
Oh, yeah.
Is he in Jerusalem? He's absolutely a part of that historical account because he followed the bloodline. But Satan's a defeated foe. Especially for us baptized Christians, Satan is a defeated foe. So what does the third theme break into? What is our opposition to God? Satan, do we need the devil to make us do it?
Oh, no.
Sin. Sin in opposition to God. Your desires, your rebellion against God is yours to own and only yours. It's not Satan's fault. Satan did his plan. He failed. He lost. He's a loser. He's a loser. Well, we can still be losers too if we follow the same thing. Satan chose to be without God. Don't let us do the same. All right, guys, we're jumping here in Exodus chapter 18. Remember what you're seeing unfold again, understanding the intimate character of God. God is going to now set a precedent for leadership, godly leadership, godly counsel. Okay? You're also going to notice, what is their government so far? What is their governing authority or authorities? Who do we got? We got two people, at least, three if you want to get technical. You got God, the governing authority. This is called a theocracy. A theocracy means a society or nation under God. Theos, God. Then you also have Moses. And Moses represents the what?
Law.
The law. So you're going to have a set of laws that God is going to bring down. Now this is not the institution or creation of right and wrong, but the awareness. It's going to open your eyes so that you can start to understand God with right and wrong. Because right and wrong goes right with God without God. Okay? So with Moses as the law, what do we have with Aaron? What does Aaron represent? Priesthood. Represents the priesthood. God represented to the people, and the people represented to God. You see mediation. Mediation, okay? That's going to be important. Now again, those sound like a lot of big terms, but it's going to be important. We also have to see this godly leadership, godly counsel in our own lives. And again, theocracy. Now a little bonus for anybody who wants a gold star. Do they stay under God's government?
No.
No.
When do they ask God for something else? Anybody remember or know?
When they're hungry and thirsty.
Okay, well we already saw when they're hungry and thirsty, specifically in Samuel. They say, we don't want God to rule over us. We want a human king. We want a man. We want to be just like the other nations. Nothing new under the sun. Same people here. Okay? I just want you to keep that in mind. We're in Exodus chapter 18. Now, I've been telling you guys, there's a wheel. There's a cycle that goes through Scripture. The wheel doesn't start in Revelation. It started all the way in the very beginning. The cycle turns. Okay? The last time that we saw Jethro with Moses, Moses was tending Jethro's sheep. Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. Okay? Married his daughter, has 2 sons. Now we're actually seeing Jethro's coming to Moses, and who's Moses tending to now? Whose sheep?
God's
God's sheep. Okay? Jethro is a former pagan priest from Midian. A former pagan priest from Midian. Okay? So what Jethro is learning from the father-in-law is the example of Moses as God. Okay? So as I said, God's been teaching the whole world. He's been teaching Egypt. He's been teaching Israel. But now we're going to get a magnification that God is also teaching Jethro. He's going to change the lives of these people that encounter this. But you're also going to know Jethro also has some wisdom that he can offer Moses. So it's incredible what God does here. So this is chapter 18. And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel and his people. And the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Let's pause there. Is Jethro familiar with the Egyptian powerhouse? The military might of Egypt? Is that something that's a secret to the known world, or do people know and fear Egypt? They fear this military. They fear this might. They know their economy. They know their pantheon of gods and goddesses. So Jethro heard all of these things that God had did. Again, you're seeing the magnification that the lesson was being received. Verse 2, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, with her 2 sons, of whom the name was Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Elizir, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So again, looking at the wheel repeating. Does anybody remember the name that Abraham's servant that went to get Isaac a bride? Elazar. Same name here. Okay, same name here. We got that name popping up. And it said, his name, the God of my father, was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Okay, so the same principle. God's the one that brought Isaac's wife to him. God's the one that brought his bride, which was Israel, out of Egypt. Okay, so you notice the wheel. Notice the similarities here. God is doing the same thing. And again, everything is highlighting. It's like God's teaching the same lesson over and over. He's highlighting different things each time. Verse 5, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her. So is Moses being a family man? Does he take care of his family? No. Because he's too busy taking care of who? Those people who are hungry. Those people who are thirsty. Those people who are tired of walking. So Zipporah had to bring Moses' wife and sons to him. And he said, hey, he sent word ahead. I'm coming, and I got your family with you. I got to bring them to you. So verse 7, So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptian for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. So the next thing you're going to highlight, you're going to star, you're going to underline, whatever you need to do. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in this very thing in which he behaved proudly, he was above them. Did Jethro get it now? Yeah. Again, is God done teaching this lesson? No. He's still bringing this. So now Jethro, a former pagan priest, there's a priest from Midian. People say, well, he's a priest of the Jews. No, they don't have a priesthood yet. Okay? This is only pagan priesthoods that exist. He's a former pagan priest who just acknowledged that God is God against all of these other gods. But notice what he says. Continue. I'm going back to verse 11. It says, For in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. The things that they boasted in, talking about Egypt and their gods, God proved that he was God. So they had a powerful economy, especially when it came to irrigation, especially because of Joseph who God sent there. And God took their economy. They had a powerful military. God took their military. And did God take their military by raising up his own army and sending the legions of heaven down to fight Pharaoh? No. What did he do? He parted water, and then he let it go. That was it. That's all it took. All it took was for God to stop doing what he did in his natural processes to prove that these gods were not gods. He had to come down and fight. It wasn't this epic story, which, of course, as comic book fans and stuff, we love that kind of stuff. We love a good story where our hero has to come down and fight this epic battle. And right when it looks like he's about to lose, he somehow finds the strength to stand up against the villain. All God had to do was turn nature off. All he had to do was flip it around. No sunlight, all darkness. Bugs galore. You want animals? I'm going to give you so many animals. He just destroyed their nature, their natural processes. That's all it takes for God. I was talking to a guy about that one time that Roger Chambers, an old preacher, had said, you walk outside and you think about all the people in the world, and you're like, man, God really has to have an army to beat these people. He could do it with lightning. He did it with the flood. All he did was turn the water on, and it never turned it off. And he destroys everything. God does not have to come down and physically fight these battles. He's battling it with intellect, with evidence. So now we see Jethro make this statement, this confession, through the experience of Moses and the Israelites. Jethro wasn't here for it. Jethro wasn't standing there watching. Jethro's getting everything secondhand, but all he's got to do is walk outside the tent, and he sees all the thousands of Israelites and the Egyptians out here to know that it really happened and it was true. And all he's got to do, again, is he picks up the Egyptian times, and it's like Pharaoh missing, army still missing. They're all dead. They're gone. Their economy's not doing good. The inflation in Egypt is really bad. So this is verse 12. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses, Moses' father-in-law, before God. So now we see this priest who's made sacrifices of animals to pagan gods before. Now he's making it to the one true God. And it's an offering. And then he eats bread with who? Moses, the law, and Aaron, which is going to be your priesthood. Okay, so you see them come together. This is verse 13. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all the people stand before you from morning until evening? So he sees Moses working all day. These people are standing in front of him, bringing complaints and things against him. Now, do you think these are good complaints? These people who are complaining just because they're hungry and thirsty? I mean, have you ever been a teacher with students? You know what it's like. You own a business and you have employees. You know what it's like to get these grumblings and complaints that are just absolutely nonsense. But Jethro sees that Moses is tiring himself. So in verse 15, and Moses said to his father-in-law, Because the people come to me to inquire of God, why they have a difficulty, or when they have a difficulty, they come to me. and I judge between one another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws. So Moses, his father-in-law, said to him, the thing that you do is not good. We're like, wait a minute. Isn't it good to make judgments? Should there be a godly leader that makes judgments and stands before the people, especially when things can't be reconciled? And it says he's making statutes known of God and his laws. You and I are like, wait a minute. Maybe this priest from Midian isn't as wise as we thought he was. But listen to what he says. And listen to what comes of it. In verse 18, both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. Does that sound realistic? Does that sound more like Jethro understands the humanity of Moses? And notice again what he's saying. These people, they're going to wear themselves out. The leader's going to wear himself out. And again, you'll see this in the modern church with the preacher. It has to be a preacher, it has to be an evangelist, he has to be an elder, he has to be a deacon. He's got to be the one that comes and prays in the hospital. He's got to be the one that does everybody's weddings and funerals. And they don't divvy out the responsibilities. And you wear your preachers out, you wear an evangelist out really quick and really easily. But notice what he says, it is not good. You're going to wear yourself out. Verse 19, listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, and that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and laws, and show them the way in which they must walk, and the work which they must do. So God's got a plan that's coming out of the mouth of Jethro. Well, why don't you teach the people God's laws and God's statutes? And then allow them to grow because of it, so that they can walk in his statutes, and they can do the same work. Notice the key there, and the work they must do. Verse 21. Moreover, you shall select from all of the people, and this is what you highlight, you underline, and you circle, because you're starting to see the qualifications of a godly leader, a godly ruler. Select from the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, haters of covetousness, and place such themselves over them rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So notice that Jethro just broke down God's theocracy, God's government, okay? God's governance, God's government. That's the key here. You need able-bodied men. You need people that are able to perform the service. Okay? People that can physically up to the task, intelligently up to the task, intellectually up to the task. You can't have somebody that gets stressed out easy. You can't have somebody that gets flustered. You got to have somebody that is able to perform the job. And it says, fear God. They got to be able to fear God. They got to be in fear of God. Not in fear of the consequences of everything under them, but of the person over them. The fear of God comes from. It says men of truth. People that are honest. Haters of covetousness. And place over them such rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So he's not giving one person charge over thousands of people. There is going to be a head guy that's over those guys, but there's going to be one over hundreds, one's over 50s, and one's over 10s. This is the breakdown of godly leadership, so that not one person has to carry the whole burden, not one person has to perform the whole service, and not one person is burdened with dealing with all of these complaints. Verse 22, and let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter that they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you when they bear the burden with you. If you do this thing and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all of this people will also go from this place in peace. Verse 24, so Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. And Moses chose able men out of Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s, so that they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged the small cases themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way to his own land. So now you got the father-in-law who's going back to his own place, but what's he taking with him? Or who's he taking with him? Back to Midian. Who's he taking with him that he just got an encounter with through Moses' experience in Egypt? God. He's taking God back to Midian. But he left a little piece of wisdom here. Notice what he says. If God says this is okay, if God commands what I just said, do it. And Moses is doing it. This is godly leadership, godly accountability, godly government. Now we're here in chapter 19. This is the thing I talked about when I said Israel's going to be at the foot of the mountain. Just like when we come together at church. Why are we coming to the foot of the mountain? Is it because we're hungry, because we're thirsty, because we owe God an obligation to answer a prayer, to work something out in our lives? Or are we coming to learn? Tell me something you want me to do, God. Tell me to stay away from something that can hurt me, God. Help me, God, my Father. Tell me what you need me to do. Okay, this is chapter 19. In the 3rd month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, from the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Now this is the same place, the wilderness of Sin. This is the wilderness of Sinai. Verse 2, for they had departed from Rephidim, and had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. Remember, Rephidim was the worst rest stop in the world, and we talked about that last Sunday. Verse 3, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. He gave them their 2 specific distinctions. The people of Israel, he gave them his name, but he also called them the house of what? Jacob. He gave him his flesh name, the name that represented his earthly self, and the Israel, which is his heavenly name that God gave him. He gives them both distinctions. Talking to you, same people though. Verse 4, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Notice what God's telling them. Where did God lead them from? They said, where are you taking us, God? God's whole purpose was to bring them where? Back to Him. Did it matter if it was in the wilderness? Would it have mattered if it was in the promised land? Would it have mattered if it was in New York City? What do you guys think? Would it have mattered where it was? No. Or did God just want them to have them for Himself? This is God's people. God wants them. Just like us as parents want you guys. We haven't seen you in a long time. We just want you to come back so we can have you. I don't care where it's at. In verse 5, now therefore, highlight this. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant. Notice that. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So what did God just tell Moses to tell them? If. Notice the if. This is a contingency. Okay? If. Which means ipso facto. If this is the if, that means if they don't do what he says, if you do this, that means that we can counter the consequence. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a treasure to me above all people. So if they don't do this, if they don't heed the voice of God and keep His commandments, will they then be a treasure above all people? No. What's the opposite of treasure, do you think, when you think of the opposite of treasure? Trash. And that's exactly what God's going to view them as rubbish. And again, God's saying this to the people, but He knows if they're going to do this or not. So who's He highlighting this for? Who needs to learn these lessons?
We do.
We do. We're going back and seeing this. If and then. If you do this, then I will do this. Okay? Covenant contingent relationship. People think God just gives it to you because He's God. He just does it for you because He's God. No, He says if, then. Notice if, then. He says the earth is mine. And we heard the Egyptian priest say that. The whole earth is God's. But in verse 6 he says, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests. Does He want a kingdom of kings and queens and princes and a monarchy? He says a kingdom of what? Priests. Okay? Again, God giving us a foreshadow because I told you Aaron's going to represent this. And a holy nation. Holy means set aside for a divine purpose. Set aside for a special purpose. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So you're seeing the beginning of the extension of Moses' covenant. Moses' covenant is going to help establish with God without God. It's going to help establish the bloodline, the restrictions to protect the bloodline. And it's going to help protect them from the third theme, which is who? Who's our third theme? Satan. Okay? How does the third theme break though?
Opposition. What?
Satan in opposition to God. What else is in opposition to God?
Sin.
Sin. You're going to see these people deal with sin as well. God is going to fulfill this all in Christ, and again, we're going to get to that. In Revelation, for those of you that are a little bit older, you notice that John says you're a priest of kingdom, or a kingdom of priests. He uses this phrase because this was accomplished in Christ. 1 Peter 2:9 also does the same thing. Peter calls us a kingdom of priests. So verse 7, so Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all the words which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So you're seeing a kind of a marriage ceremony taking place here. God has given the stipulations for His marriage covenant, and they said, I do. Everything that you just said, Moses, which means everything that you just said, God, we are going to do. They've agreed, right? So now if they agree, if they do this, is God obligated to then do that? Yeah. But if they don't do this, is God then obligated to do that? No. Not at all. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. Now again, you think God heard them yell, I do, we'll do it, we'll say it, we'll do everything He said? But it says that Moses brought it back to the Lord. Who does the Lord want to hear it from?
Them.
He wants to hear it from who?
Us.
He wants to hear it from Moses. He wants to hear it from Moses. Because who's accountable of the people right now? Moses is accountable. Remember the hierarchy of governance here. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and believe you forever. Now He's going to mention it in front of the people. What do you think would happen if God spoke to them right now? What does it say happens if you see God speak? Yeah, they're dead. Now they're not purified in any way like Moses is, and you're going to notice that they have to be purified, for they can even come to the foot of the mountain. And then even then they're afraid to touch it, which I'd be afraid to touch it too. And again, us as men, we kind of get ourselves in some situations. One of us would dare each other to touch the foot of the mountain, but I would be afraid to do it. But He says that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. This is God establishing the evidence that they're going to need. They'll never be able to deny it from Moses anymore unless it's in what? Rebellion. You're going to see in rebellion, with Korah's rebellion later in Numbers. So, finishing verse 9, so Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. So you got a guy running back and forth. He's like, God says this, and people say, oh, we'll tell God. He's like, God, the people of Israel said this. He's like, well, tell them I said this. And he's got to go back and tell them that. So what does God need? He needs a mediation. He needs a mediator, right? And again, we know He's going to accomplish that in the priesthood. Verse 10, then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Let them, highlight this, wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of the people. You shall set bounds for all the people around them, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. This is the feet of the mountain in some translations. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether a man or beast, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. Now notice you can't touch the feet of the base of the mountain, the feet of the mountain. Can anybody think of a New Testament reference where you're not allowed to touch the feet? Where you're told not to touch the feet on the third day? Jesus, what happens? Tell me about it. Don't just tell me about it.
And He hasn't yet ascended.
He hadn't yet ascended yet. Jesus resurrected on the third day. When Mary jumps at His feet, He says, don't touch me. I'm not yet ascended to the Father. Don't touch my feet. Don't touch the base of the mountain. You guys see that? So you're already seeing, again, another typology of Christ. He says, anybody that touches this mountain, what's going to happen to them? Yeah, they're going to be dead. He said, I don't care if they're going to be stoned. They're going to be shot by an arrow. I don't care if it's a deer or a person. They're going to die. This mountain is holy to God, set aside for a divine purpose. Verse 14, so Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. What is the New Testament reference to washing your clothes? Baptism. You also see that in Revelation also. Verse 15, and He said to the people, be ready for the third day. What does the third day represent? What's it going to represent? The new covenant, the third day, resurrection. Be ready for the third day. Be ready for the typology of the resurrection. It says, do not come near your wives. Okay, in Revelation you get a picture of this because it says that they're virgins. They're virgins. It says, do not come near your wives. Then it came, this is verse 16, then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. And the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Again, see all this in Revelation, by the way. The voice of the thunderings and lightnings, the voice of the trumpet. In verse 17, and Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. So let's pause there for a minute. When do we see a dark cloud in the New Testament and an earthquake taking place when these people are at the feet of the typological mountain of Jesus Christ? In His crucifixion. In His crucifixion, the sky became dark. In His crucifixion, there was an earthquake, and the temple shook, and it ripped the veil. You guys seeing this in the mountain here? Isn't that amazing? And then notice that it says the Lord descended upon it, and there's smoke and fire. Well, what happened to Jesus in His crucifixion? What did He experience for every person that's ever lived and ever will live? He experienced hell. And is hell said to have great fire and smoke and furnace? Absolutely. Read Revelation 17, and you'll see an example of that. Verse 19, and when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. So now God and Moses are having a conversation. Now, did the trumpet get lower so that everybody could hear? It says it got louder and louder. This trumpet is a part of God's voice. Verse 20, then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Does Jesus get caught up on the mountain of God by anybody in the New Testament? Besides God, by the way? Matthew chapter 4. Somebody tempts him in the wilderness.
Oh, the devil.
Takes him up on a mountain. The mountain of God. Then he takes him up to the temple. People think it's the Jewish temple. He takes him up to the temple in heaven. That's why they're able to see the kingdoms of the world. Just giving you all these little bonuses, man. Again, the wheel. Once you see the wheel, it's amazing how much of this stuff continues. In verse 21, the Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Are they supposed to look at God? No. What did He say? He wants them to do what? He wants them to hear. He wants them to listen. You don't need to see. You don't need to see. Jesus tells the Jews, He says that you guys are an evil generation, that you need to see a sign. You have to see something. Seeing that here. It says, or many of them will perish. Verse 22, also, let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. Now, why do the priests specifically have to consecrate themselves? What are these priests probably corrupted with? Sin through what? Paganism. Remember, the pagan worship. This idea of these false gods.
Sorry, good.
No, you're good. Verse 23, but Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set bounds around the mountain and consecrate it. Then the Lord said to him, away, get down, and then come up, you and Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest He break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. Again, he was going back and forth. Now he's going up and down. But he wants him to bring who with him? Who's he going down to get now? Who's going to be a part of this conversation?
Aaron.
Aaron. And Aaron represents the what?
Priest.
The priest. The priesthood. Alright, so chapter 20. We're doing time. Chapter 20. You are going to see the commandments given by God. Okay? All of the rules of the world, all the regulations, all the things that you want for yourself and your family and your property and your life and your money are protected and accomplished in these 10 laws. Now, what does the number 10 mean apocalyptically for God?
Complete.
Complete. You are getting the complete law of God. Now, again, Jesus summed it up. He simplified it like it was a fraction. And He said, love God and love people. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself, and you're going to accomplish all of this. You're going to notice inside of the 10 Commandments, God gives them moral law. Right and wrong. You do this, you don't do that. Okay? He's also going to give them civil law. This is how you interact as a society. This is how you're going to be able to coexist. And then He is going to give them ceremonial laws. Ceremonial laws are inside of His treasured kingdom of priests that they have to obey and follow in order to stay pure and righteous enough to bring us to who? To who?
God.
Well, Christ. I was looking for Christ, but that's how we're going to get back with God. It's through Christ. So this is chapter 20. And God spoke all of these words, saying. Now remember, who's listening? Who all is listening here?
Everybody?
Everybody's listening. They're at the foot of the mountain, afraid to touch it, told not to go near it, consecrated themselves, washed their robes. And who else is up here on the mountain, standing face to face with? It can't be God the Father, so it has to be
Jesus.
It's got to be Jesus. It's got to be God the Son. This is the mountain standing on the top of the typological mountain of Himself. And Israel is listening. Now again, hopefully there's nobody trying to peek. Because if they try to peek through this cloud, what are they going to do?
Die.
They're going to die. Okay, so this is also a test of obedience. Verse 2, I am the Lord your God. What better way to start out a conversation with the people than to establish your character, your authority that goes with it, that comes through their responsibility. This is why you should listen to what I'm saying. I am the Lord your God. This is why you should do it. I am the Lord your God. But He's going to give them a personal response here. Verse 2 again, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. He just made sure it was a personal relationship that they remember. I'm the one that did that. I'm the one that took Pharaoh's firstborn. I'm the one that cursed the Red Sea. I'm the one that gave you light and then darkness. That was me. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. Why is that so important to God? Is it because He's afraid that they'll get our loyalty and He won't?
He's jealous.
Why is He jealous? And is that a good thing? Because God tells them not to be jealous.
He created us.
So God is not jealous of us. He's jealous for us.
Yeah.
See, God knows what something that you and I, again, are going to come to learn through studying and worshiping this God in the Old Testament. You reflect what you worship. You become like your idol. You will adopt the characters of the thing that you idolize the most. If you idolize a God of war, you are going to be a warring, fighting character. You are going to have battles with people, battles on the inside. You're never going to be content. You worship a God of lust. You're going to fulfill the lusts of this God. You're going to do the traditions. If you worship a God of fertility, if you worship a God of irrigation, if you worship a God of hunting, and you have these pantheon of gods that we know God is against, if you worship them, you will become like them. And I gave my story before. I'm going to give it again. I'm going to give it again because it's a good analogy to have. Man and a woman have a woman swaddling a baby. It looks like it's getting food ready. Put it in the car seat. I'm going to go anachronism here. Put it in the car seat because they're going on a trip. It looks like they're going on a journey. And the husband's making food. He's wrapping up sandwiches. He's putting them in a basket. And they're excited to go? No. They seem very sad and downtrodden. And the wife looks at the husband because she realizes what they're doing. See, what they're doing is they're actually getting ready to take a 2-day journey to sacrifice this baby to the god Moloch. Because Moloch, the Canaanite god, requires child sacrifice. And in order for them to be successful this year in their harvest, they have to sacrifice their baby to the god Moloch. They're going to burn this baby alive. And the wife looks at it. It sounds heavy, right? But this was a fact. This was history. You're going to see God condemn this. But she looks at her husband and says, I'm sorry. And she's staring at him. And the husband says, what's wrong? What are you doing? Why are you staring at me? And she says, I can't help but think if you served a different God, you would be a different man. And we wouldn't be doing this today. You become what you worship. God knows that. God knew that. With God, without God is all about who you worship. If you worship God, you're with Him. Or if you worship something else, you're without Him. You're seeing the spiritual servitude. You're seeing the spiritual mark of God. I can't protect you if you give your loyalty to another God. That's what He's jealous of. Again, He's not jealous for us. He's not jealous of us in the sense of covetousness. He's jealous for us because He cannot save you if He's not your God. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. What do you think they're going to do if they make an image of these creatures of the earth or anything, or even in heaven? What are they going to do?
Worship.
They're going to worship it.
Now remember, before Babel, there was astrotheology. They worshipped the stars, the moon, the sun, the planets. So you see these images, you see these paintings in all of these mythologies. But now he's saying, don't make an image of an animal either. And where did they do that at? In Egypt. Remember Heket the frog? They had all of the animals, statues everywhere. Don't do that. But he says, don't make one in heaven either. This is one of the things you're going to see the Catholic Church do later when they start carving images of angels and saints. They go exactly against what God tells them to do here. Verse 5, you shall not bow down to them nor serve them. Now, does anybody know what's coming up here in a little bit? Are they going to make an image of an animal?
Yeah.
What kind of animal?
Golden calf.
Yeah, the golden calf. What are they going to do in front of it?
Worship them.
They're going to bow down in front of it. They're going to worship it. Again, God is setting the line so that you and I can see when they bother you. So that you and I, when we see God's consequence, we can understand it. Because God's going to kill 3,000 of those people for doing that. Now, had He not shown us this and told us this and given us the reason as to why, remember, it's not just who God is, but why, you and I would be like, that seems a little extreme, God. Maybe a stern talking to would have did it. But God notices that they're not there for Him. Again, what did He say? What have you done for me lately? They're not here for who God is and what He does in their life in eternity. They want Him to fulfill obligations. Said, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Now again, this sounds like God's going to hold the sins of the children, or the father, against the children, doesn't it? Does that sound like a righteous and fair God? To hold us accountable for the sins of our father or our grandfathers? What is going to take place here if the grandfathers are a bunch of pagan worshippers? What do you think their grandchildren are going to be?
They're going to teach their generations.
Yeah, you got it. The generations are going to be affected. God is saying, I'm going to visit the iniquity. The sins of your grandfathers are going to be from generation to generation. Now, the word visit can mean good or bad. And that's going to depend on what happens when the visitor gets here. But because the generations are going to be afflicted by this. Now, again, you're going to see this in Israel. Generations are afflicted by disobeying God. This isn't for the pagan world. You understand that, right? This isn't for the Gentile world. This is for the people of Israel. They're going to be the ones that God visits the iniquity on their generations of generations. And you're going to see that at the time of Jesus as well. And they're going to make a claim, by the way, to do this. They want God to hold them accountable when they say, let His blood be on our hands and on our children. Verse 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes His name in vain. This means empty. Vain means empty. It means without any purpose, without anything. Now think about it if it was your name. If I used your name in an expression every time something went wrong. If we used your name as a negative connotation for fear or for aggravation, instead of something glorified and holy and purposeful, we just used it as a random phrase. And your name becomes so watered down. Are people going to have that fear of authority when it comes to the use of your name? No.
Just so like Karen.
Huh?
Just so like Karen.
Yeah, I can see that. and again, so I like where you're headed, because with your name comes your what? Your reputation.
Yeah, because
Your reputation is a part of that name. And if God has a bad name, He's going to have a perceived what? Bad reputation. He doesn't want them to use His name improperly. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't say phrases like, oh my God? I can't say definitively that's what it means. I would say I probably wouldn't do it, just to be on the safe side. Now, I don't know if that's my cultural generation that's been hammered into me in my life, or if that's the proper exegesis of this scripture. But I can tell you, if God's name was important in the Old Testament to Him and His reputation, I don't see why His name wouldn't be important now. And I would say the same for Jesus Christ. When people use His name as an expression, or as a phrase, or as a comment of negative connotation and fear, it doesn't seem like a good idea when you understand what it means to them. And again, think about it with your name. Names are really important. In verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now we have a ceremonial law, the day of rest. And He's going to give them a lot of Sabbaths. But He says, and keep it holy. Remember my Sabbath day of rest, and keep it set aside for a divine purpose. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord God. In it you shall do no work, You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. So this day is going to be something special and holy to God. And He wants it to be special and holy to them. In verse 11, for in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now He tells you why He wants you to work 6 days and rest on the seventh. Now again, this is Old Testament. Remember, we don't do this. We go to the first day of the week, Lord's Day. But why did He want them to work 6 days and rest on the seventh? What is this a view of? What is this going to constantly remind them of?
God.
Yeah, God said, I worked 6 days and I rested on the seventh day. You're going to do the same thing that I did, and this is going to be holy and hallowed and set apart. Now, again, this is very key for us adults, a little bonus for us, against evolution with God. People say, well, God created the world and it took Him millions of years, and each of the 6 days represents 1,000,000 years. So God took 1,000,000 years on the first day, took 1,000,000 years on the second day. But is that what He told them to do? To work on the 1,000,000 years, second million? He said days, 24-hour, morning and day periods, just like in Genesis. Verse 12, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Any parents want me to read that one again? Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord has given you. Now, does this mean if you disobey your mom and dad, God's just going to strike you dead?
No, but wait.
Maybe.
He's going to kick them out of the land. He's going to take them out of the umbrella of protection that was offered to them through God, through the parents, through the family dynamic. You're going to be kicked out. You're going to go depend on yourself, and it's not going to be easy to do when you're not going to survive. By honoring your mother and your father, who are you honoring?
God.
By dishonoring your mother and your father, who are you dishonoring? When you choose to obey your mother and father, who are you choosing to obey?
God.
When you disobey your mother and father, who are you choosing to disobey? Who has God established as your earthly authority for you as a child until you're old enough to be your own? Who did God establish? Who did He choose?
Your parents.
Your mother and your father. Are you guys listening to this? This is key for you guys. We already went through the ringer. I already learned how to do this ourselves. There is a reason God wants you to do this. You guys looking at me? All the kids looking at me? With us, without us. Because we're teaching you to be with God, and without God, an example as a counter. If you choose to disobey us as we're teaching you to be with God, by definition, you would then be what?
Disobeying God.
You would be disobeying God. You would be without God. Okay, you guys got to hear. This is one of God's, part of His complete 10 laws. If God gave you the complete law, He did. This is one of them. Verse 13, you shall not murder. Verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. Verse 15, you shall not steal. Verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Notice what he covered there in this line here. Don't murder. Don't take the life of somebody else's. That's not your authority. If God gave them life, and God is responsible for death, when you commit murder, you are claiming whose authority? And if you're a usurper of God's authority, who does that put you right in line with? It says, you shall not commit adultery. If you are faithful and loyal to your husband and your wife, you shall not be disloyal to them by going out with other husbands or wives. And what is this a spiritual view of with God?
Without God.
Well, it would be without God, but can we have relationships with other gods and goddesses and still be considered the bride of Christ? Absolutely not. It says you shall not steal. God's teaching them how to live and coexist in society with each other. Having and not having. Ownership. This gives you a right to land. This gives you something that God can bless. This gives you something to build on. It gives you a foundation of generations. He says you shall not steal. Don't take what's not yours. Did somebody try to take something that wasn't God's? Yeah. Satan. Again, you're seeing all of the regulations. Verse 16, when it said, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Does God want you to lie to get your neighbor in trouble? Does He want you to lie to destroy your neighbor's reputation? Because if your neighbor is also a godly person and you're destroying his reputation, whose reputation are you destroying? God's. Now again, this isn't bringing your neighbor to account because he's dishonoring God's reputation by his life. This says bearing false witness. You're going to see the Jews break this very commandment against Jesus Christ when they have to lie to convince people that he deserves to be killed. And then it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. God is trying to fulfill discontentment. Be happy with what you have. In daycare, what does it say? You get what you get.
And you don't throw a fit.
And you don't throw a fit. And God's saying, don't worry about your neighbor's house. And don't worry about your neighbor's wife, his servant, or female servant, his donkey, or his ox. Don't covet what's not yours. He's trying to teach contentment. And if we have a God who owns the whole world, and out of the whole world he decided to give you a little piece, or a medium piece, or a big piece, shouldn't you be respectful and loving to that God who didn't have to give you anything? Doesn't it change that perspective? Now again, you see your neighbor being what you would perceive as blessed more than you. Does that mean God loves him more? Is that what's taking place here? No. Quite the opposite. You'll notice that the more they have, the less God they have. And Jesus brings this up also. The more they have of that stuff, the less they have of God. So when you come out and you look at maybe your small property or your small house or your small whatever it is, you think, I got a lot more room for God. I got a lot more room for God because I don't have all of this stuff. And if you keep getting rid of stuff, we'll have all kinds of room for God. In verse 18, we'll closing it up here. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning, the flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. So they were already told not to cross like a certain barrier, but now you picture them stepping back even further. Then they went. Then when the people saw it, then they said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." Do they have the proper fear of God now? Are they starting to get it? Are they going to keep it forever?
No.
How far is the golden calf going to be?
How far?
Yeah, how long does it take for them to worship the golden calf after this moment of fear from God?
Not at all. Like a few seconds.
Not long. Not long at all. Okay. Verse 20, my Bible's folded. And Moses said to the people, "Do not fear." What? God, he wanted them to be afraid. Do not fear, for God has come to you to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. Two different types of fear here. Fear for your life, fear and the consequence, fear of God, that's a good fear. This is a reverent fear. Okay, just like you would have of your parents when you're in trouble and you know you have to get your butt whooped because you did something you weren't supposed to. This is not a fear of a misunderstanding. This is not a fear of necessarily the dark or the fear of what it would be like to fight a bear or a tiger. Okay, this is a different type of fear. Us being afraid of God is the sense of his consequence of hell. Is that going to save you?
What's that?
Being just afraid of hell, does that save you?
Oh, no.
Is that the proper fear of God? Is that what it says? That's the beginning of wisdom? Is that fear of God? What would be the ultimate fear of God? What would you think would be the one thing that you would be afraid of God to have for you?
Wrath.
Okay, wrath. For me, it would be disappointment. For me, it would be disappointment. To read all this, to know all this, to study all this, to teach all of this, and for God to say, I'm just disappointed. You didn't do something I told you to do, or you refrained from this, or you did this sin in secret, and you did all of this stuff, and I'm just disappointed, which is exactly what he tells one of the churches in the book of Revelation, by the way. You just make me sick. I'm just disappointed. He doesn't want them to be afraid of him in the sense that they don't want to come near him and talk to him and be a part of him. He wants them to fear his authority and his consequence. Is he coming down here to hurt them and harm them? Does he have bad intent for them when he comes to visit them? No. Not if they do what he says to do and obey his voice. Then they don't have to be afraid. But if they don't do these things, then should they be afraid in fear and reverence of God? Absolutely. And then notice what it says, that his fear may be before you. This means in front of you. This means the thing that you're walking behind is your fear and reverence of God. Your fear and reverence of God is always going to keep you walking in the right direction. And it says that you may not sin. 1 John chapter 2, he says, I write to you, dear children, that you would not sin. God is trying to keep you away from sin because sin keeps you away from what?
God.
God. Sin keeps you away from God, or God keeps you away from sin. Those are your only two choices. It's so simple. We have two choices. We don't have a million different things to have to analyze and think about. I want to be with God, or I want to be with sin. And then here it is, verse 22. Oh, no, I'm sorry, here it is. I'm sorry, 21, my Bible's folded. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. So these people are afraid and they're backing up, and Moses is getting closer. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves." Does God want images of himself? No. What does he want worship? How do we worship God if we don't have an image, we don't have a picture, we don't have a statue? What do we have of God?
Faith.
Okay, faith. But what do we have of God's? What did he give us?
Holy Spirit.
What did he give us also in the Old Testament? His name. He gave us his name. And we're like, well, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's all you need from God that brings all of this together. So it comes with faith, but it's his name. That's what he gave Moses. You tell the people that I am God. What did Jethro say? I acknowledge that he is God. It's his name, which gives us his what? What comes with his name?
Authority.
His reputation. His reputation. I was helping you guys out for that one. Verse 24. "An altar of the earth you shall make for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I record my name, I will come to you, and I will bless you." In every place where I record my what?
My name.
My name. Why is his name so important? Well, I am the self-existing one. He said Jehovah Jireh, God my provider. Then he said that God is my banner, which is a war reference. Verse 25, "And if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for it you should use your tool on it, and you have profaned it. Nor shall you go by steps to my altar, that your nakedness may be exposed on it." We're going to get into all this in Leviticus later. God has given them the law of the altar. Now, are they familiar with altars, by the way? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're former pagans. Remember that. And then the Israelites are former pagan society members that saw this happening. But God is pulling it back to himself. He's going to keep magnifying his law. We're going to get to those law of the servants. We're going to talk about the bondservant that Paul says that you and I become as Christians. But guys, we have to have this type of reverent fear for God in our own lives. We got to make sure that we're walking behind it. Oh, I'm stuck again. Was this your idea? We got to make sure that we're walking behind it, because that's what's going to push our steps. That's what's going to draw us the right way. The reverent fear of God. God is not coming to hurt you, but to help you. God is not coming to condemn or damn you. He's coming to save you. But it's your ultimate choice, with God, without God, through the Messiah, following that bloodline to Christ, which is what you and I have all been, well, most of us have been baptized into, so that we don't have to be afraid of Satan, who's a defeated foe, but that we can do what? We can choose God rather than, what's the third theme break into? In opposition to God? Sin. That we can choose God rather than sin. This right here, guys, when John says, "I write to you, children, that you would not sin," he says, but if you do sin, we have an advocate, a high priest that speaks on behalf of us to the Father, who is righteous and just to forgive. This is your moment to analyze your life. Am I sinning in ignorance? Is there something out there I'm not paying attention to? Am I sinning in purpose? Am I rebelling purposefully against God? Which means I don't have a fear and reverence of God, nor his consequence. And again, usurping his authority over your life. Maybe there's something that you need to get going on in your life. Maybe it's not something that you're doing you're not supposed to. Maybe there's something you're supposed to be doing and you're not doing it. We come to church to learn, to go out and be disciples, make disciples, baptize them, and then continuing to teach them. And again, this should draw persecution in your life. You should be able to find evil people that want to do bad things to you because you're such a beacon for God by bearing his what? His name. Now I'm going to give you a little trick there too. What else do you and I bear according to Genesis?
His light. Image.
His image. We get his light too. It says you're a light on the hill, you know. He says we bear his image. So not only do we bear his name, just as he said in the Old Testament, I give you this, we bear his image. People can come to know God intimately through you. If you mirror his characters, Not just looking like Him, but mirroring His characters, His mercy, His grace, His reverent fear. Christ had a reverent fear of God the Father. What more should you and I have a reverent fear of? Who's not the eternal Son of God in any way. God gave you the authority as the judge to judge yourself. You don't have to stand in front of the priests. You don't have to stand in front of Moses. You don't have to stand in front of anything. And Jethro said, you get to stand in front of Christ alone with this cup, judging yourself away from sin toward God. Or Paul, he'll tell us the same thing. If we don't judge ourselves away from sin, then what does God do?
Judge us.
He judges us. You got it. If we judge ourselves, then we would not be judged. But if we do not judge ourselves, and judge ourselves properly, you can't be bringing the same thing back to the Lord's table every Sunday expecting to get God to say it's okay. Eventually God knows that you're a liar and that your desires are way more meaningful to you than His. Love God, love people. Maybe the Lord had an extra snack for you. Yeah, exactly. God just gave everybody a warning. I hope you were paying attention.
Did it hit you in the head?
You were the example.
Oh my gosh.
With that example in mind, judge yourself properly. God doesn't have to hit you with the phone either.